Mark Rogers TV talking college football on the week preceding championship weekend, possibly the most important weekend of the season with all the big rivalry games, but most of those rivalry games have high stakes involved, and we start in the SEC with Arkansas taking on Mizzou, and the Hogs, a much different football team than what we found just a couple weeks ago in winning 2 consecutive SEC games after a 17-game slide, and they take on the Mizzou Tigers. Not real flashy, not real popular as a pick across this country to take on the West, but Mizzou in the driver's seat. We bring on Dieter Kurtenbach of SB Nation to talk it up. Dieter, thanks so much for joining us.
Anytime, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so this Arkansas football team, let's start with them. The Hogs, we were wondering several weeks ago, what would this team do in another conference with a little softer schedule? Now they've finally broken through against LSU and just completely annihilated Ole Miss last week. Just your thoughts about the Hogs overall at this point.
Well, they're playing perfect Bret Bielema football. It's taken a while for them to get into the rhythm of what Bert wants to do, but if you're talking about an SEC West team, a lot of people see that old traditional SEC West, traditional being about 10 years back, power football, getting a bunch of big old hogs on the line, no pun intended, and just jamming it down your throat with running it 45 times a game, and that's exactly what Arkansas is going to do. They have an identity. There's so few teams that seem to have an identity anymore, and Arkansas has always had that identity, and now that identity is working. And you look at what they've been able to do on the defensive side of the ball, that's kind of stunning. But offensively, they know exactly what they want to do. They have a game plan for every game, and it's pretty much the same game plan regardless of who their opponent is. They're going to run the ball, and they're going to run the ball effectively. They're built to do it. So does it surprise me that they have won the last 2 games? No. It's the manner that they're winning it, these shutouts. They haven't given up a point in 2 weeks. That's shocking to me. I don't imagine that streak continues against Missouri, but at the same time, the Hogs are rounding into form. I don't know if it's at a perfect time, but they're certainly ending the season with the fury.
Yeah, so Bielema comes from Wisconsin, and he's pretty much got the same formula as you allude to with Alex Collins and Jonathan Williams, the 2 big backs out of the backfield running downhill behind a pretty massive offensive line. There's a lot of reconstruction to do on this roster still to get to the place where they can challenge the Alabamas and Auburns and Mississippi States at this point. But at least Bielema fell into a roster that at least had a couple ingredients that he could work with Collins and with Williams. Any thoughts about the quarterback situation? Brandon Allen had a pretty miserable campaign last year. He's played much better this year. Still not an elite quarterback, but got a little bit nicked up against Ole Miss last week.
Yeah, Brandon Allen's one of those quarterbacks that you always wonder what if. It seems as if he's always been nicked up, and it's never quite come together. There have been these few moments of brilliance, and obviously he doesn't throw it as much as you would expect a quarterback in the SEC to throw it around, but that's a challenge because Allen has struggled when he's been injured, and I think it's fair to say that most of his struggles have been attributed to injury. And so if he's not 100% for this game, it might not be advantageous to go with him. But if you can get him in there, it's such a tough choice. It really is. It doesn't sound like he's going to go from everything that's coming out of Fayetteville. So that's definitely because otherwise, I mean, you look at how Arkansas is playing right now, you would have to consider them a hands-down favorite over Missouri. Missouri hasn't done anything to convince anybody that they're one of the better teams in the country, despite having an 8-2 record. But with Allen out, it's very difficult to say that Arkansas is going to pull away from the Tigers.
And for those people that might be catching the Hogs for the first time this season and don't know the story, Brandon Allen leaving last week's game again. An under 50% passer last year, threw more interceptions than picks against the SEC. He's improved this year, 58%, 16 touchdowns, 5 picks. And after he got hurt, knocked out of the game, he gave way to his much more heralded younger brother, Austin Allen, who's a sophomore in the system. So Arkansas, the feel-good story right now at 6-5, getting to postseason play, but it's really all at stake in a tangible way for this Mizzou football team. And it seems like, Dieter, that everybody is thinking that Georgia's the better matchup for the Western Division, but this Mizzou team just keeps winning with defense.
They're not wrong that Georgia's the better matchup, but that might not come to fruition. Missouri is this team that's winning despite every possible metric, and you watch them on a weekly basis, and it's winning ugly. It is ugly football. This is a team that lost to Indiana earlier in the season, and you look at Missouri's 2 losses thus far. Both of those times they've given up more than 200 yards rushing, which has to make Arkansas salivate at just the thought of it. It's not necessarily a good matchup for Missouri, but that defense is really, really strong, and without a passing game, if Allen isn't playing, if Brandon Allen isn't playing, that can allow Missouri to bring more guys into the box and commit to the run even more, because there isn't that threat of the passing game, which could keep this thing close. If Arkansas is at full strength, I don't see a way Missouri can pull this one out, just based on the personnel and based on the weaknesses of that team. But if the passing game isn't there, it's probably going to stay pretty close. But no question, Georgia's the better team. We saw that earlier in the season when Georgia shut out Missouri 34-0. But sometimes the cookie crumbles a different way.
Yeah, this Mizzou football team, the program for some reason grows defensive ends that are NFL ready, and right now it's Shane Ray, junior defensive end, eye-popping stats, 13.5 sacks, 19.5 tackles for loss, and they've got Marcus Golden on the other side with 14.5 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks. So defensively, it looks like Mizzou's pretty well prepared for the matchup. They shut down the pass. They're second in the SEC in defense. They sacked the quarterback. They're tied for the SEC lead. Matty Mock got some valuable playing time when James Franklin got hurt. Took the team partially to along with Franklin to the division championship last year. But this offense, up until the last couple of weeks, we've seen a little bit of life, but not a great offensive showing for the Tigers this year.
Yeah, no, the offensive line is a work in progress at best, and that's put a big damper on the Missouri offense. And beyond that, the loss of Dorial Green-Beckham, loss might be a strong word, but not having him in the lineup is evident on a daily basis. Mizzou has good wide receivers, but they don't separate very well. And that puts Mock in a pretty precarious situation when the line's breaking down and there's no one to throw to downfield. He's an excellent improviser, but that improvisation most of the time hurts as much as it helps. And against Tennessee, he was really solid. You look at that first drive of that game, they drive down the field without a worry, hot knife through butter. And the rest of the game, they struggle. Tennessee, obviously, a defense rounding into form themselves. But you look at the problems that Missouri offense has, and then you look at a guy like Mock, who isn't necessarily the cool, calming presence. It can go one way or another. Matty Mock can throw for 500 yards one week, or he can throw for 30 and 4 interceptions. You really don't know. It's a total firebomb. And if Arkansas is specifically controlling the tempo of the game, and if they get ahead on the rushing game early, putting Mock in any sort of more volatile situation, you're only asking to exacerbate that volatility already.
Yeah, much like Dylan Thompson, he loves to sling it down the field. Not great on the completion percentage, but he can hit for chunk yardage. While Allen has Hunter Henry at the tight end position as a security blanket. You mentioned Dorial Green-Beckham last year, and LaDamian Washington, not quite the freakish athlete, but in the same mode. Matty Mock could just kind of chuck it down the field and hope one of those guys kind of frame up and box out the defensive back and make the catch, and they just don't have that. Bud Sasser being their most productive receiver this year. Do you have a feel for this one with Mizzou at home and everything on the line?
Yeah, it's tough to say. Also, a Friday afternoon game is very strange. I have to imagine that the schedules are going to be knocked off. I imagine that home field advantage plays more of a role in this game just because of the weird schedule of the week, with Thanksgiving being the day before and being on the road on Thanksgiving. But if I had to call it straight up, I would say that Arkansas would win it. But given that home field advantage, I think that's probably a field goal difference in Missouri's favor. They just seem to have some voodoo magic on them this year, and while Arkansas is a really, really good team in a really, really good form, I don't know if they can keep up what they've done the last 2 weeks against Mizzou.
And as you know, Dieter, it appears as though the SEC is trying to frame this up as a rivalry. It was an LSU-Arkansas final Friday after Thanksgiving game for the last several years, and now it's Mizzou and Arkansas, and the SEC, as they typically do, make right decisions. Not only do they set up a rivalry that would typically maybe be on the back burner. It means a whole bunch with the SEC Eastern Division Championship on the line. All right, let's move on to a game that doesn't need a whole lot of hype, because this is typically for a whole bunch in the state of Florida and on the national scene, with Florida taking on Florida State. And I got a quote here from the Florida defensive end, Alex McAllister, Dieter, who said in reference to the Seminoles' 26-game winning streak, "Yeah, we're going to end that. Don't worry about it."
Nope.
It's coming from a 6-4 football team, of course.
Yeah, there is a lot that you can. You look at, you want to break it down logically. Florida State is a much, much better football team. There's no logical reason as to why Florida State won't win. But you watch the entirety of the season, and you think about the emotional bursts that Florida will have, given that this will be Will Muschamp's last game. You give Florida State's inability to really pull away from opponents that they're better than. There's a lot of weird in this game. And so logic might not be the best way to go about predicting it. If Florida can run the ball effectively, which they've proven they're capable of doing, it's rare, but they've proven it, they have an excellent chance of beating Florida State. I also think that Florida State, coming off that game against Boston College, will probably have residual effects. Boston College is a very disciplined, pound-you-in-the-nose team, and I can't imagine that won't play a factor in just sort of a body blow sense going into this weekend. And the emotional high of Florida rallying around Muschamp. I mean, those players really do love Will Muschamp, and everyone always says, and they try to build it up to be something bigger than it is, and they're going to win it for Coach. But it's hard to say that in this situation. It seems like that is actually the case. That's not just hyperbole. I don't think that Florida pulls it out, but I think this game is a lot closer than the Vegas lines makers say, and I think it's a lot closer than Florida State would like it to be come late in the game.
Dieter Kurtenbach joins us from SB Nation. We're talking Florida State. Dieter, the other thing here is there seem to be two separate camps when it comes to Florida State analysis this year. Yep. There's one thought that this team wins, and it doesn't matter how they win, style points, throw them out the door. They just know how to win games, and regardless of who's in front of them, it could be Wake Forest or could be the Green Bay Packers. They're going to find a way to get the job done when the gun sounds. And then there's a line of thinking that the luck's going to run out. They're going to face a really good team in the college football playoffs, or maybe Florida or Georgia Tech in the next 2 weeks, and this is going to catch up with them. So which camp do you find yourself in?
I find myself in the latter camp, to be honest. I think that if the Florida game doesn't trip them up, and maybe I was a little bit higher on it earlier this week than I am now, just after really deep diving into the numbers and trying to find a viable reason as to why Florida can win and not coming up with one. But that Georgia Tech game, that's going to be a doozy. And Georgia Tech has made a lot of coaches have sleepless nights across the years, and Florida State is that's the kind of game that you overlook. It's a neutral field, and who knows what the weather's going to be, and no one's going to be there. And that's the kind of game that makes college football great, because no one's watching it, and then final quarter you turn it on. It's what's going on over here. This is not the same Florida State team as last year. This is still an immensely talented Florida State team, but the college football season as it's presented itself doesn't have a great team, I would say. And Florida State very much has fallen back to the rest of that elite pack without one being kind of the supreme leader of that pack. It's going to be, if they're overlooking these next two games in any way, shape, or form, they're going to fall. They do not have much of a leg to stand on in that area. That said, when you have the best player in college football in Jameis Winston under center, and you have that much talent around him, and on the defensive end as well, it doesn't take much. You can get away with procrastinating on the games. And but man, that Georgia Tech game specifically, and that triple option offense, which is really humming right now, and a defense that's figured out some of the kinks that it had earlier in the year. That Georgia Tech game looks real good if you're someone looking to make some money in Vegas. But I do think this Florida game will be interesting, very interesting.
And Dieter, you bring up the one guy that's so controversial, but at the same time, he's the guy that makes me hesitate in pulling the trigger on an upset as well. It's Jameis Winston, and for his I'm not going to say that he's played lousy in the first half. He's played marginal football in the first half, but continues to make the right decisions and make the plays. And you just have to marvel at the kid's resolve to make the right plays in the clutch over and over and over. It's not a mistake at this point. He's done it 7, 8, 10 times in the last couple of years, made the plays in the clutch.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you watch him play. It's when he has it on, it's something else. When he's not thinking about it, it's something else. That is one clutch performer. But especially against a team that runs the ball, can grind you out like Florida and Georgia Tech these next 2 weeks, that changes the dynamic significantly. Where you're not on the field, and if you get down 2 scores and you're in the third quarter, Jameis Winston's ability to come from behind might be stifled, because that guy can score a touchdown in a minute. He can get back into a game like that against teams that are throwing the ball. But when it comes to game control, and I know that's a buzzword now, but when it comes to controlling the ball, holding on to the rock, and if someone gets ahead, that does change the dynamic, especially if there's a pretty good margin still in the second half.
And for a Florida State team that has not been able to run the football this year, running into a Florida team that, aside from the Alabama game, has played really sound defense this year, they do have the talent, they get the strength, the athletes, the speed on defense to give it a challenge. So if they don't turn over the football, if we somehow see a rushing attack like they showed against Georgia, and maybe they unleash Jeff Driscoll because, hey, they got nothing to lose, and this is the swan song, they got a puncher's chance.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how effectively they can run the ball early, because the best matchup in this game is definitely going to be Vernon Hargreaves against whoever wants to line up for him against Florida State. Winston has seen a couple of pretty good corners this year, but there's no one as good as Hargreaves. He's going to lock down a side of the field and make Winston's life pretty difficult. And when you add in a really strong defensive line, an unheralded defensive line, and a secondary that can make plays and cause disruption, this is not a cakewalk for Florida in any way, shape, or form when you look at, despite everything that's going on at Florida. The question is really the offense. Can that Florida offense get anything against a Florida State defense, which isn't quite what it was last year? So they can get good 4 or 5 yard gains on first and second down and set up play action, and that has to be their mentality. If they're thinking they're going to throw the ball effectively with Treon Harris or Jeff Driscoll, they're completely out of their minds, and that might be why there's going to be a new coaching staff next year. But if they can run the ball and they have 2 or 3 runs for every pass, that's a good formula, and that's going to give them the best chance to win.
So, Dieter, in case you're holding your pick for one of your stories on one of your many platforms later in the week, I won't put you on the spot, but if you've got a pick for us, I'll take it. Yeah,
I think it's Florida State 31, Florida 27. And I think that it's going to be a very late touchdown again. They're just going to pull it out again, and then I'm going to go fly to Las Vegas and get my money on Georgia Tech.
Very good stuff. I know they seem to be gaining some momentum as a possible chic pick to upset things and provide some more chaos for us on championship weekend. So we appreciate the time, Dieter. Dieter Kurtenbach of SB Nation joining us. Love talking to college football and appreciate the insight into these 2 extremely important matchups.
Yeah, no, it's going to be great games this weekend. Going to have a blast. Thanks for having me.